Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Best Phone Plans Podcast. In this episode, we're talking about the best rural home internet solutions, voice over LTE versus voice over 5G, and more. Joining us today, we have special guest Austin Lutz. Austin, why don't you take a moment to kind of talk about yourself, kind of what you do, and then we can kind of just dive right in.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Stetson. As Stetson said, guys, my name is Austin Lutz. I work for a consulting company here in the North Carolina area. We focus primarily on voice over IP technologies, not necessarily in the cellular space, but it's been a passion of mine for a long, long time. And I use some of that knowledge in the voice world to translate to my interests in the cellular world. So I got hooked up with Stetson, and I'd say probably a year and a half ago, maybe a little bit longer, when he started his channel. And I've just been a huge fan of his channel from day one, and really just wanted to be a part of this and get on the show and talk a little bit about some of the cool things that Stetson has lined up in some of his videos, and then also some of the cool technology that's coming out over the next, probably 6 to 8 months.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for that intro, Austin. Yeah, it's great to have you here. Dennis and I are super stoked about it. And yeah, do you want to just kind of like dive right into, some of the best rural home internet solutions? I think this is one of the topics we chose because I know you're super passionate about kind of, bringing internet access to as many people as possible and making sure that they can access high-speed broadband. But that's not necessarily the case for everyone. So what does the landscape kind of look like right now for like rural internet solutions? And, what are kind of the solutions that are available?
Gotcha. So a couple things on that, right? So traditionally, we've all been accustomed to the normal cable provider that delivers internet over the normal coax connection. We all have those in our homes that we either built or had purchased. And we also have a couple other things in the way of fiber. We are seeing increasing amounts of cellular home internet, and we'll get into that a little bit later in the show. And then we also have some of the hotspot unlimited plans that I think you've covered in some of your videos as well. So we have a lot of different options in the home, like in for rural America. But I think one of the things that we struggle with as a country is defining what is broadband, right? So the FCC markets broadband as 25 megabits down by 3 megabits up. And for your average Zoom call, you're looking at about 1.5 to 2 megabits per second for a 480p stream. I'm sure you guys know that that's not very good. So when we talk about broadband and high speed, I personally don't think that delivering 480p video would qualify as broadband. Like, I just don't see how that would be beneficial for somebody, especially in the way things are moving now with, all the COVID stuff where people are working remote. We're seeing an enormous amount of bandwidth increase. I mean, Spectrum most recently came out with a report that was talking about how their bandwidth had jumped up and has consistently remained in the upper tier of like what they would normally see on peak times throughout the evening and on the weekends. They're just seeing that traffic all the time. And that's because people are staying home. So it's interesting because all that traffic hasn't really gone anywhere. It's just coming to the house. Whereas when you worked at an office building, these companies would purchase huge fat internet pipes to support hundreds of people. Providers are scrambling to figure out what the next step is going to be. And that kind of brings us to the overall topic of this discussion is, home internet options for rural America. We've looked at some options with both HughesNet, Viasat, and then most recently with Starlink.
So is this you personally, or is this like just people in general?
I have personally looked into these options, like at my house. I live in the country-ish, sort of, but we do have high-speed broadband,
Okay.
much faster than the FCC 25 and 3.
You have
But
cable out
I
there,
have
or-
no, we only have one provider. It's Spectrum. So
Okay, they're cable, yeah.
we Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you said
Yeah.
fiber. We do not have fiber. I've been slowly pushing for that for a long time.
Yeah.
I call everyone that I can. I talk to AT&T reps, and just yesterday actually I called Google Fiber, and the lady was like, "No, we're not ever gonna bring fiber to where you live." So that's disappointing, and it kind of brings me to my next point is like, these big providers don't have any interest in bringing high speed, low latency fiber directly to people's homes like AT&T is doing today. Even Google Fiber, like themselves, like they have a couple of different presences in major metro areas around, but I don't know if you guys have seen, there's been a lot of like uprising from people that are living in these cities because Google just came in and just kind of tore up their yards and destroyed the streets and was like, "Hey, we're laying fiber here." Have you guys seen that?
I haven't seen that, but we've seen
Okay.
something similar actually with Verizon and their 5G, where technically I think the town or the
Hmm.
city owns the yard property or like a certain section of the yard, and
That's
Verizon
right.
is, from a technical legal stance, able to go in there, but they're just putting these kind of huge boxes that are an eyesore on these properties for their cable infrastructure and for their 5G infrastructure, and they're kind of an eyesore that devalue the property to some extent. And I know some owners are feeling very dissatisfied with that.
Yeah, and I saw a similar article. And you're right, Stetson. I mean, they do have a 3 foot right of way, that's provided from the city to these telco providers for both city like sewer, water, telecom. But it still doesn't give them unfettered access to just go in and start tearing up
Yeah.
people's yards. I mean, it's kind of a common courtesy to be like, hey, we would like to bring internet to your home. Do you mind? Oh, you do mind? Well, it doesn't matter, right? And I think that's kind of like that's kind of the telco mantra is like, we're gonna ask you, but we're still gonna do it.
I
Right.
mean,
So I
that
totally
kind of
understand.
that kind of has to be that way, though, doesn't it?
It does.
I
Yeah.
mean, we've already seen like a lot of places when 5G was rolling out, right? Like a lot of communities were freaking out because they were saying like 5G equals cancer, right? Well, if we
Yeah.
let the general populace have their way, then those towns would be cell phone dead spots, right, and become further behind. So you kind of have to let telcos do what they got to do.
Yeah. No, I,
Um,
I, to- I totally agree with that,
but
Dennis.
I want to backpedal a little bit. I want to focus back to your discussion of what the FCC deemed as broadband. Me
Mm,
and Stetson on a previous episode, we talked about what we thought broadband should be. So I think it'd
mhm.
be really cool if we set the bar for what do you actually consider to be broadband in your eyes, Austin?
So for me, dealing with this every day, we have, I have extensive experience in working with different like levels of circuits, whether it be, direct copper, coax, cable, fiber, wireless point to point, cellular, all these technologies I've directly worked with. But if we're talking about a consumer home internet connection for kids to go to school, to video chat, things like that, I really believe that to have an acceptable level of broadband, you need 50 megabits per second to sustain multi video streams at a person's home. So, like, imagine a family of four, right? So, you've got four people in the house, and let's say two of those people are on a video chat all day long for their job or for their school. So, if we transmit video at 1080p, for one stream, we're looking at like 10 to 12 megabits per second, depending on the compression. It varies wildly depending on what app you use. Like, for example, I've used Amazon Prime. They stream uncompressed 25 megabit 4K. But Netflix, if you've seen that, they stream 1080p that's compressed to 6 megabits. So there's no real rhyme or reason for that. But in my eyes, Dennis, I think 50 megabits down by 50 megabits up is what I would deem as an acceptable level of broadband.
Okay.
25 is not even enough to really stream more than one 4K stream, or even two video streams.
Okay.
Yeah,
So you're
that's
shooting for symmetrical then. Okay.
Yeah, that's kind of the other thing too, right? Is like, when we talk, assume we're going to talk about DOCSIS 4. Every iteration of DOCSIS, starting from like 2 to 3 and now to 4, those guys have always touted how the next generation technology is going to be the best, right? We're going to get 10 gigabits per second with DOCSIS 4 and 6 gigabits per second upload. I mean, obviously, we're not going to see that. I mean, even with DOCSIS 3, we're not getting those level of speeds downstream or upstream, right? I mean, you guys have had cable internet before, right?
That's what I'm
Stetson
currently.
and Dennis. You
No,
currently. Oh, you've never had cable internet.
I don't think
Interesting.
so.
Okay.
We've had Google, or excuse me, we had Verizon FiOS in my old home, and now I'm in
Okay.
Longmont, and we have symmetrical fiber, which is
Wow.
unreal.
What a life, huh? How
Yeah.
about how
I
about that?
I've literally had everything from dial up to to
Uh,
DSL to cable to now and fiber.
yeah, yeah. Now, I mean, obviously, I'll show a little bit of my age here, but when I was like 7 years old, we had a 56K modem, a dial-up internet, um,
Wow.
and we're talking. I mean, guys, yeah. I mean, loading web pages was a chore. So when you started dinner, you could go load a page, and then like a couple of minutes later, you could come back and next click, next click, next click. So we've definitely come a long way. But what I was getting to, Dennis, is like when we talk about the upload speeds for non-symmetrical internet, it's kind of annoying because I personally don't care to have 500 megabits down or 200 or 300 or even 1,000, right? I would personally like to have somewhere in the range of like 100 by like 100 megabits down by 100 megabits up. That gives me so much more flexibility. Couple that with the low latency connections of fiber or even fixed wireless. I think that's going to be a lot of what we see moving forward in the rural broadband space where customers are not able to afford the Starlinks or the Viasats or the HughesNet. Because I mean, have you guys looked at pricing for HughesNet?
I
Yeah,
haven't looked at HughesNet. I was looking at other options though, so I'm kind of curious how they compare. So it sounds like,
Yeah.
for just to step back a little bit, for rural broadband, you kind of have to choose like the one or maybe two if you're lucky ISP providers in that area.
you're
Maybe
not
you
gonna
don't get
have
it at
two.
all.
You're not
Maybe,
gonna.
yeah.
Yeah, you're
If you
not gonna
get
have
it,
two. You're gonna have one, and if you have one, you're lucky. I mean, a lot. Listen, for real rural, there's actually lots of places that don't even have cable, where cable feels like fiber. If you're lucky in rural America,
hmm
like honestly, if you're in rural America, you're often stuck with DSL, if that, and it's probably since you're gonna be so far away from the nearest, distribution center with how the nature of DSL works, you're probably going to cap out somewhere around 1.5 meg, 3 megabits per second, somewhere in that range, if you're lucky. And then you'll have satellite as your other options, and then maybe cell phone as a backup. But typically, if you're in rural America, cell phone coverage typically isn't good either. So it's typically either DSL or satellite.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
to answer your question, Austin, about satellite pricing, yes, I saw Starlink was charging like $100 for uncapped, which is pretty good pricing. And then I know HughesNet and Viasat's pricing is similar to cell phone plans from years ago, where you get like a 10 gig data cap for like $50, and then after that they throttle you down to like 1.5 meg or 2 meg or some varying degree of throttling.
That's right. Yeah, there's different tiers with HughesNet and Starlink. Or I'm sorry, HughesNet and Viasat. And one of the plans I just wanted to highlight, and just so we're all on the same page here, right? So Stetson, you have municipal fiber where
That's
you are,
correct.
and how much do you pay per month?
$80 per month.
Okay, so you have symmetrical gigabit,
That's
1,000
correct.
megabits down, 1,000 up, and it's $80 a month.
That's
Now,
correct.
if I go to the website for HughesNet today and I look at their options, they have four options on their Gen 5 plan, which is their new offering that they're offering to customers. It's currently marked down right now. So originally the plan is $60 for 10 gigabytes. And after you use the 10 gigabytes, then you are immediately throttled in the neighborhood of 1 to 2 megabits per second. And then the tiers go up in $10 increments as well as 10 gigabytes. So you go from 10, 20, 30, 40. And then once you get past the 30 gigabytes, the price jumps for 50 gigabytes to $140. So, when we talk about pricing for satellite internet, it's really not a conversation starter for a lot of people, because the people that live in rural America that don't have these options, that are probably not moving to big metro areas, either A, want to live out there and they have a farm, or they have some other reason why they can't move, or B, they don't have the money to do that. And $130 for 50 megs internet is it's really not that reasonable.
I mean, that's
So,
cheap for me. I was gonna say, sorry to
oh
cut.
yeah,
I didn't mean to cut you off, but
oh good, no,
for my small town, I grew up in a small town of like 600 people. We have a regional provider called Armstrong. Now they got
okay,
better, but back in 2013, just for my internet connection, I'm not talking about the cable or anything else, just for the internet, I was paying $300 for a 50 by 5 megabit connection.
Holy
$300.
smokes.
Yeah, that was their Zoom Enterprise at the time. That was considered a business class internet connection.
Enterprise.
Yeah,
Wow.
50
Yeah,
by 5.
Yeah, and I think that's the difference too, Dennis. One of the points I'm making about this is that they don't guarantee you any speeds. They say you might get this, with this latency or whatever. But I think one of the cool things about that Starlink has is that, while HughesNet is deploying satellites 20,000 miles out into space, Starlink is deploying satellites that are 300 miles out into space. And just for a frame of reference for those watching or listening, when we talk about 350 miles, that's like a 5-hour drive. Like that could be from like Charlotte, North Carolina to Atlanta, and an hour past that. So a day trip for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But obviously 22,000 miles, that's like, New York to Tokyo 4 times. So
Jeez.
that's why your latency goes. That's why, Elon Musk has touted a lot of these the Starlink option as 20 to 40 milliseconds currently in the beta. And he expects to hit anywhere from 14 to 30 once it goes into full production sometime later in 2021.
Yeah, I was reading because their approach is basically lower to earth means better latency, and because they're using lasers to sort of connect the satellites together and to connect the streams together, and light travels actually faster in space where there's a vacuum, so they're able to achieve the higher throughput they need for their more reliable internet. But yeah, you want to continue touching on Starlink and kind of what they're striving to do and just the system. For someone who doesn't know, we have satellites that are in the low Earth orbit, right? And what's Elon's sort of game plan with this, and who's the target demographic?
Well, after watching what Elon Musk does every day, I think the target demographic is probably everyone. I mean, I think his general interest with Starlink is to be the ISP for everyone. And I think if he continues to deploy these satellites and to build out this incredibly wide and vast network, I think he can serve a lot of people. I don't think it's going to be for everyone, especially for people like you, Stetson, that have direct municipal fiber, Google Fiber, AT&T, which continues to build out their network today in the U.S. I think a lot of these people that are living on the edge where they are not able to get cellular connections, whether it be through the T-Mobile home internet service, or even Verizon's home internet through millimeter wave, which they're definitely not going to get out in rural America, or even like your traditional cable option. I think anyone that is on the cusp of that will be looking to this service, because when we talk about Starlink, they're no different than HughesNet or Viasat in that you still have a $500 price up front to purchase the equipment. I did see something with HughesNet where you can actually lease it, kind of like a cable modem lease.
So it's a little bit better, not that upfront cost.
It's not better. Yeah,
it's over 24 months or something, and then
it's a little better. But I mean, when we're talking about these kind of prices with HughesNet for 10 gigabytes, I don't know if that's any better. $60 a month for 10 gigs. I mean, even if you're on the cusp of cellular connectivity out in the rural America, I mean, you probably could get a 10 gigabyte cell phone plan and put that into a hotspot or a router or something and get a better experience than you would with 600 milliseconds of HughesNet to space.
Right? Yeah, that latency.
I mean,
the latency is what kills you. Yeah, I think that's a huge problem with satellite, and that's why Starlink has been revolutionary. Go ahead, Dennis.
I was gonna say, I think my big understanding with Starlink, and this is the really big benefit to Elon, is that where he's setting it up as far as from Earth to space is concerned, it's pretty much stationary once it's there. It's moving at the exact same speed that Earth moves. So you can set up these geographical cells essentially, which right now in its current beta test, you have to be within that certain region. You can't just carry it around. But once Starlink becomes fully operational, I think the big move for Starlink is that you're going to be able to have internet essentially pretty much everywhere. So it's very portable. It's going to be great for RVers, and it's going to be really targeted to rural Americans. I don't see Starlink thriving in urban markets just to the raw density and bandwidth needs for that market, or suburban markets, because suburban markets, think towns over 1,000 people, are probably going to have access to either sub 6 gigahertz 5G or or they're going to have access to the cable and maybe even sometimes fiber. Now, I
Mm-hmm.
will just say, Austin, I actually think anybody that has cable, if you can afford it, is probably better than Starlink, in my personal opinion. Because I'm sure even with you with Spectrum, I'm sure they at least offer up to probably 500, if not a gigabit, if they have DOCSIS 3.1 rolled out and your
They
area is
do, and
down.
they do, and they do
And
offer
then
940.
yeah, like 1,000 down. They probably offer like 40 up, and I've showed actual speed tests for me in my. I have Comcast. I actually moved into the city of Pittsburgh to get Comcast, and back when I had gigabit before I downgraded, they actually over provisioned. I was getting 1,400 down by 40 up before I downgraded it for cost purposes because. To give you some perspective, for that connection, I was paying about $104 for said
Okay.
connection.
I mean, I would pay that for those speeds. I mean, that's pretty impressive for that
Yeah,
price
but
because
60 bucks is better. I'm paying 60 now for 300 by 10.
yes, and I would pay that too. And you're totally right, Dennis. I would pick Spectrum over Starlink just because it seems to be more reliable. Latency is probably very similar, but I paid $55 for 200 by 10, and that's way more than what I need at my house. So
Yeah.
I don't, I just, we talked about this a couple of days ago, or last night, excuse me, and we talked about the needs of broadband and what the needs are for your average consumer. People just don't need 1,000 down and 1,000 up. It's cool. It's a party trick. And it's like, look at all these cool speed tests. And it's great. But, for the average use case, I just don't see people using that amount of bandwidth.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it can be used by some applications, but for the average consumer, yeah, people are what? They're
Yeah.
streaming Netflix, they're they're
Yeah,
watching their
totally.
TV shows, they're FaceTiming their friends,
Yep.
and the truth is they are going to be totally fine with, like, as we discussed, 50-50 symmetrical or maybe a little bit better 100-100 symmetrical. I
Yeah.
actually want to jump back to Dennis's point. Dennis, you were saying that Starlink would likely serve kind of more rural America, and I think that's true. But I also think that America may not even be the target market. Like, I could see this really taking off in other rural locations around the world, such as Africa or these other places that may not have
I
the infrastructure. You disagree?
I disagree very wholeheartedly.
What? Yeah, tell me why about that.
Well, for Starlink to work, you still need a base station, which means you still need fiber to be available in that area, right? Like at some point, you still need something terrestrial to be deployed. Which, if you're talking about like
Well, do you
under
though? Because my understanding is you buy the Starlink
no, I'm talking
connect.
about for Elon Musk to set up Starlink. There's a base station on Earth
Yeah.
that's talking to these satellites, and that base station needs to be connected via fiber because that's the end way that you're getting connected back into the main backbone of the internet before your traffic actually goes to like Google servers or wherever. So first things first, the place you deploy it needs to have that infrastructure in place, which is expensive. And then secondly, the upfront cost for setup to get Starlink into the hands of the consumer. No one in any third world country is going to be able to afford $500 upfront cost to get a satellite dish. And
That's right.
also, in these undeveloped places, a lot of them don't have very reliable electric grids. I know that's sad to say, but if you think about it, stuff Starlink still needs like proper reliable electricity, so you're not going to be getting connected. Honestly, for third world places, what I've seen taking off the best has been cell phone connectivity via like
Oh,
LTE
interesting.
and 5G.
Yeah.
That's cheap. That's possible. Your phone has a battery inside, so even if your house doesn't have power for a day or whatever,
Yeah, you
can
still have
use
it.
your phone.
I could potentially see Starlink appealing to maybe a village. If you get a village of people to come together to equip something for what they need, like a public space that would have it, maybe. But I think, Dennis, you bring up a really interesting point about the mobile connection really being the solution there. Do we see something like that in the United States, and what does that kind of look like? And this maybe actually will dovetail nicely into T-Mobile home internet and kind of what the internet options are that we have from our current sort of cell phone providers.
Yeah, I mean, at least for me personally, cell phone internet isn't very viable in my market from T-Mobile, and with Verizon, they're still blocking off a lot of zip codes as far as availability is concerned, as far as their actual home internet. As far as hotspots are concerned, We know that T-Mobile came out with those really aggressive new hotspot plans, like the 100 gigs for like, what was it, $60, Stetson or something like that a couple weeks back.
Yeah,
Yeah, that sounds familiar.
it was
I mean,
50. I think that was a business plan.
those are pretty solid, but the data cap's not going to meet the overall arching needs for like a whole household. I mean, it's pretty easy to blow past 100 gigs if you're just streaming Netflix. You know, it's only like maybe like a week's worth of streaming, if that. So, I don't see cell phone viability being that viable right now here in the U.S. just due to cost being too expensive and limited options of availability. But I know Austin, I know that we talked last night. I know you have T-Mobile's home internet right now in your area. Why don't you tell me a little bit about your experience?
Yeah. So I signed up for the T-Mobile home internet service about 2 months ago, and I've started to use it kind of as a backup internet to my Spectrum, and then I switched over to it to run like VPNs and all sorts of network traffic through for work. And I love the concept, Dennis. I really do, and I love what they're doing, and I love that we're starting to see more N41 being deployed around the city. Most everywhere has the N71 600 megahertz from T-Mobile, which is the low band spectrum that we see for long range penetration and out into rural areas. But I think what's holding them back currently is their current firmware that's on these devices. In that, the biggest issue I see is they don't really support VPN pass through, which is needed for a lot of people to do their jobs. In the age of COVID, everyone is working from home. So when we talk about deploying this to people's homes, it's hit or miss. And if you go rifle through the Reddit forums on T-Mobile r/T-Mobile ISP, there are numerous occasions of people being like, yeah, it doesn't work, and there's no rhyme or reason for that. But couple that with the overall experience and like speeds, like I'm getting roughly 50, I would say 50 megs on a good day, but during the middle of the day, and Stetson, you covered this in your video on T-Mobile about different QCI levels.
The speed test.
QCI, yeah, exactly, for the speed test. But the QCI levels that we're seeing for T-Mobile home internet is set to 9, which is the bottom of the barrel. So whatever's left over, we'll give to you.
So that's for reference. Magenta Plus, as well as T-Mobile prepaid, they're QCI 6, so they're top tier. And then after you drop down a tier, you go to the MVNOs, the prepaid carriers. This is Mint, this is US Mobile, this is Ultra Mobile. Then you have actually hotspot data. This is normal, like you have your T-Mobile plan and you're using it as hotspot. That's tier 3. And then all the way at the bottom, QCI 9 is T-Mobile home internet, as well as all the users who consume over 50 gigs of data on their cell phone plan. So this really is like the network prioritizes everyone else, and you get the bottom of the barrel with T-Mobile home internet. For my testing, speeds were about 15% as fast as what I was getting on my Magenta Plus plan. So, depending on time of day and congestion, that really can vary and make a difference.
Yeah, and you were talking about you were talking about the lack of VPN functionality, but aside from the VPN pass-through, I know there's a lot of other limited options on the current firmware they have on their gateway, right? Like you can't configure NAT types, you can't do. I don't think you could turn into I don't think you could turn off the router functionality. Like you can't make it not
bridge mode. Yeah, so that doesn't really matter anyway, Dennis, because I was telling Stetson last night. What they're doing is they're using a technology called carrier grade NAT. So even normally when you have a cable modem or you have fiber coming into your house, they will hand off a publicly routable IPv4 or IPv6 address. And IPv4 is just the 4th generation of the IP protocol. IPv6 is just the 6th generation. So back in 2015, ARIN, which is the stakeholder of all public IPv4 addresses in the United States, they exhausted all that. So then they started having to give out more and more IPv6 addresses, and we're recycling used addresses now. But the problem is they use carrier grade NAT. So you share a publicly routable IP address with tens, maybe thousands of users, which is why when you go and you purchase T-Mobile home internet and you go into whatismyip.com, it might show you in a completely different area than you're at. So for me, it shows me 40 miles away from where I'm actually located. And I've seen people on Reddit and other forums show that, like if they're in Kansas, it could show that they're in Colorado, in states all over the place.
Wow.
So
Yikes.
bridge mode is obviously a big concern, Dennis, because if you want to run any sort of like services out of your house, like a VPN back to your house, or like a Plex server or any sort of like media device, that's not going to happen. And there are
Gaming.
workarounds. There are gaming, NAT type, NAT type open. There are workarounds, but again, we're trying to like this service is designed for the average person that gets up in the morning and goes to work. We're not deploying T-Mobile home internet for network engineers here. Like we don't need to constantly create a way around this. I think they need to do some real heavy lifting with this firmware to make it a viable product to compete against Spectrum or other cable providers. I think the cable providers, including AT&T with fiber, and even these local fiber municipalities that you've got, Stetson, they know that, and that's why they're like, okay, we're concerned, but you guys can't even do like normal stuff that people need. So while I love T-Mobile home internet, and I have had good experience with both speed and reliability, including latency too, I just don't think we're there yet. I think
Sure.
we're going to see a lot of that once N41 gets completely rolled out. Um, T-Mobile's president of technology, Neville Ray, has said that by the end of 2021, every site should be updated for N41, 2.5 gigahertz. So
So that's a bold statement. I hope he's right because I'd love to see that rapidly rolled out.
me too. Yeah, that would be huge. And I think that's going to kind of bring us to the next point is that like these absurd prices that providers are asking for their services like VSAT and HughesNet and all sorts of other rural options, they're going to have to come down or they'll just not be a company anymore.
Yeah, I was seeing from other places like Nomad Internet, Unlimited Ville, Trifecta, OTR Mobile, Infinite LTE Data, Limitless Data. These other providers that have sort of been marketing these. I think they're reselling like old business plans or something that do have unlimited data, and they're just letting people
Mm,
use them in routers and hotspots. And I'm seeing like 129 a month for T-Mobile, 149 a month for T-Mobile, 200 a month for AT&T,
yeah.
250 a month for Verizon. These astronomical prices. And I think the fact that T-Mobile is able to deliver their own solution for just $50 a month
Yeah.
is great. And this could be a very viable option for a lot of people. But as you mentioned, the experience just isn't there yet. And I know, Austin, you've messed around with the settings a little bit. What happens when you restart the router?
Okay. So, and this is still not fixed in the latest 0143 firmware. So when you restart this router, you have to start over from scratch all over again. So it literally, when you reboot the router, it's like the router has no memory and it forgets about everything that it was configured, the SSIDs, all the passwords, all of the information stored, all the data. The SIM card still remains active, which is interesting because when you reboot it and you boot it back up, it's like, hey, we noticed you have a new home internet router. Would you like to get it set up? It's like, no, I've already set this up. I don't know what to tell you. Like, please remember what I told you. So
Yes.
there is some word about on the forums with T-Mobile that they are working on a fix, but you know how that goes, right? I mean, the
Right,
old saying
right.
goes, "Don't buy something for what it could be, buy it for what it is today," and that's kind of the mantra that T-Mobile needs to take into account is that they likely rushed the deployment of this router, which is for those that are listening, it's literally looks like a trash can. I don't know how to describe this thing. It's like a
It's like a
it's a gray
Mac
trash can.
Pro from
It is.
2013, the 2013, or
Yeah.
maybe it's 2012 Mac Pro. So yeah, it's a small trash can, a little bit of a tower.
Yep.
And the good news though is you don't have to pay any equipment fee for this, right? You're
I
just
do
paying for the
not.
service.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you call. So the way that they market this is that you go on their website first to check availability, and then if the the tower is available to be used for home internet, because that's one of the things they don't really tell you either is that the towers that service your zip code and your street address have to be able to support enough traffic to not only service you for your home internet but also their existing customers. So assuming it is available, they will let you know they're going to give you a call in the next day or so. For me, it was within an hour, but I don't know
Wow.
if I was just lucky or I just
Or
called at the
what?
right
Yeah.
time. Yeah, I don't know how that works. I've heard people it takes a couple of days for them. Um, but yeah, so they call me. They say, "Where do you want your router shipped?" I tell them the street address. They add it to my account. Very painless. For me, it showed up in about a week, and then I started using it. Activated right out of the box. There's nothing you have to do. It comes with a pamphlet about, I don't know, maybe like this size with just a picture of the router, and it just has a picture of you plugging it into the wall. So
It's like
So
IKEA basic instructions.
it
so
is it's very basic. Yeah,
Austin. So, I know from last night you have a similar setup to what I plan to do at my new house. I didn't get the chance though to hear
mm,
how you have this all configured, since like we discussed from before, the T-Mobile router is pretty limited. So you have Spectrum as your main connection, right? You talked about this earlier, and you have
I
T-Mobile
do.
as your fallover. So how are you making that happen? Like, are you using like a Ubiquiti managed switch to get this done, or how are you doing this in your personal house?
Yep. So at my house today, I have, as you said, the Spectrum cable connection coming into WAN one port on my the Ubiquiti Security Gateway, which is the older product from Ubiquiti. It's the three port little square box. I'm sure you've seen it before, Dennis. Um, but it has two internet ports. One is WAN one, the other is WAN two, and the WAN two port is where I terminate my T-Mobile home internet connection. I used to use a Nighthawk Stetson. I think we talked about
Yeah,
this.
yeah, you had that. That was great.
I used to use the Nighthawk M1 with one of my T-Mobile free line on us plans. I mean, I have so many of those free lines from T-Mobile. They're all over the place. I can't get rid of these. They're every phone I have has a T-Mobile SIM in it. Um, so I used to use that for my backup internet, which was like 20 gigabytes a month because it counts against your hotspot, which was enough for me, honestly. I really just wanted to know when I lost internet through Spectrum. And then I have a way to access some of my cameras. Like I have the Ubiquiti security cameras at my house too. So that was always nice to have. Um, and then from there, Dennis, I run just a standard gigabit Ethernet link downstream to a Ubiquiti switch Gen 1. It's a 24 port non PoE switch. And then from there, I fan out to all parts of like my property. So I've got a couple different underground Cat 6 runs that run through to where my animals are. I've got some that run out underground to where my dog house is. I've got a camera on my dog. So if like I'm at work, if I go on vacation or something, he's at home, I can still check in on him because the camera is strapped to the side of the pole. Um, and then I've got it's basically just Cat 6 strewn out across my house that power, I think it's two Ubiquiti Nano HDs, which is the 4x4 MIMO Wi-Fi access points. And then I've got some Ubiquiti UAP AC Pros, which is the older 3x3 MIMOs.
So
So
when
the
the
house is pretty peppered. Yeah, go ahead.
so when the spectrum goes down, right? You're using this T-Mobile home internet as the
Mm-hmm.
fallback. Um, do
Yep.
you have any issues with your Ubiquiti gear using that T-Mobile gateway essentially, since it can't
I
like? Do you have
used
like a
to.
double net? Yeah.
I used to, yeah. So one of the things that I ran into when I started down this path, this has kind of been like a year in the making, Dennis. I started out with the hotspot with the Nighthawk, and that's kind of why I got the Nighthawk because it had an Ethernet port on it.
Hmm.
So the Nighthawk does support bridge mode, but again, irrelevant because T-Mobile uses carrier grade NAT for a lot of their services, even on like their cellular side. So when I used that service, I had issues with failover. So if I ever lost internet through Spectrum, by default, the Ubiquities don't know, like, it's not an automatic failover, and it's by design because let's say, for example, the mechanism you use to fail over the internet connection, you get a false positive. So you ping an IP address out there in the internet somewhere to verify your internet is up. Typically, that is your provider's default gateway. Um, I don't know if I want to get too deep into this, but the idea is you would monitor that default gateway. If the gateway is not reachable, then we would tell the router, hey, you need to start sending traffic somewhere else. So I noticed that it took about a minute to fail over, which wasn't really good enough. So there are some ways to customize the Ubiquiti USG, even the Dream Machine Pro that you're looking at, Dennis, for your use case. You can customize that to lower the threshold for interval failures. So today, right now, if I lose internet for more than 5 seconds, then it will automatically reroute itself through the T-Mobile home internet. And then I continue to check WAN 1 on like the main side to make sure and to check when the internet comes back. And then after 5 successful ICMP echoes, which is normal ping out to the internet, it will reroute itself automatically back to WAN 1. So for our use case, and obviously this is way overkill for a person's home. I just
this is more business
am
talk,
a tinkerer,
yeah.
and
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's amazing. I think that's amazing. Incredible setup.
This is way more. This is way more than you would need. I mean, people don't care. But for me personally, like I think it's cool because I get to have always uptime internet. Now it's not going to be the fastest always because if I lose internet during the day, I'm going to be subjected to the QCI level 9 for priority. But it is absolutely enough to get the job done. To use a VoIP phone, to join a WebEx or a Zoom or a Google Meet or whatever, and do your job.
And this was inspired because of the work from home? Is that what inspired the follower? Because I would imagine your spectrum probably doesn't.
It doesn't really go out that often, Dennis. And when you ask like what inspired that, I started doing this like probably 3 years ago.
He's way just so before into it.
I was just so into it. So I got involved. I got involved with some Ubiquiti stuff probably I'd say back in 2017. And then I bought one piece of it and I was like, okay, this is cool. And then I started buying more. And then I could not stop buying their gear because one of the cool things that they do is they don't have the best products for everything, but I do love that they unify everything together. No pun intended.
Ecosystem.
Yeah, the ecosystem. Marquez Brownlee mentioned this, Stetson. I know you're a big fan of his. He put out a video, I think maybe like a year ago, talking about the Apple ecosystem. And
right.
The concept of that is really interesting because it really does matter. One of the things that we talk about in the ecosystem world is like Google, for example, a lot of great products. Ecosystems kind of crazy because they'll deliver a product, 6 months later they'll kill it. Apple, on the other hand, rolls a product out and that sucker is never going to die. Like ever. Like you will keep that forever. It's there forever.
It's reassuring. I think, the way Marquez Brownlee described it in his video is that Apple's kind of like a walled garden, right?
Yeah.
Where on the inside, it's this beautiful, lush garden. The fruit is delicious and ripe. You have everything you need. And, if you were to peek outside the garden, maybe there are some things that are better, some things that are worse. But inside the garden, everything just works together in harmony, and it's this amazing experience. And I think that kind of relates to what you were saying with Ubiquiti and what they've done, where they may not have the best product or the most customizable product or be a winner in every single category, but the way they have allowed their technology to work together in harmony really does create just a better end user experience.
That's beautiful. Right. Yeah, and one of the things I do love about... Oh, go ahead, Dennis. Sorry.
Oh, you're good. I was just going to say what's beautiful about Ubiquiti for me is that there's a clear linear upgrade path. Like, you can start out as just prosumer and get, like one of their simple non-Dream Machine Pros and get a couple access points and you're up and running. But if you're like maybe a small to medium sized business, you can easily swap that out. And they got gear going all the way up to like enterprise. And it's basically like the poor man's Cisco.
Sort of, yeah. It's not very good, but I agree with that. They do offer products similar to that.
Yeah. I mean, it's the poor man's Cisco.
It is the poor man's Cisco. That's right. The UXG line has been a complete disaster from the day they rolled it out, from software support to hardware ability. Like, explain to me this: you've got $1,000 UXG Pro, whatever thing they offer, that doesn't do full gigabit IPS, but you've got a $300 Dream Machine Pro that does. Their lines of their lines of products don't necessarily fall in line with what you would think of as like, oh, consumer, prosumer, because they do have a consumer grade line, which is their amplified line. I don't know if you guys have ever seen that.
Yeah, I
Yeah, I
recommended
think I
it to
have.
Stetson
Yeah,
actually.
yeah, it's a good product. One of my friends actually uses it, and he has had no issues using it at his house. Um, so yeah, there's Ubiquiti has a great line of gear. I'm really excited about what they're doing long term. Hopefully they continue to progress with their Protect line, with their cameras, their local on-prem NVRs. Um, One of the reasons why I got into this was, or got into like the rural conversation with internet and the Ubiquiti stuff is on-prem management, and that was a big thing for me, because I wanted to see and just like to play around with the fact that all this gear can be at your house and you don't have to rely on the internet to see the information. So having all of your recordings at your house, having all of your like feeds and all of your data from your controller living at your house is great. And I think a lot of people that live in rural America that don't have a consistent internet connection would probably appreciate something like that.
Well, since we're talking about Ubiquiti, there's actually one piece of gear I wanted to bring up to you, and this is kind of a curveball that I thought about last night when I was kind of like dreaming. So,
Love it.
you know how Ubiquiti has their long-range Wi-Fi antennas that you can basically put on like a home, right?
Yes.
You know what I'm
Yeah.
talking about?
Yeah. Are you talking about the dome like nano stations or the locos or the? Okay.
So you can get maybe up to a mile if it's a clear enough path, depending on how you do it. But I was gonna say, here's a creative solution for rural America. What if someone like yourself, right, who actually is able to get Spectrum, was just to beam it to a couple other homes? You know what I'm saying?
So that's a great thought. And one of the things that and this is great. This is a good segue, Dennis, because one of the things that we see or that I've seen lately is wireless internet service providers, or WISPs.
Yeah.
They're doing a lot of what you're describing. Now, what you're describing is called breaking the terms of service with your contract with Spectrum. That will get your service cut off. Now, what the WISPs are doing is actually offering service, the last mile service, right? A mile down the road. They purchase or lease fiber from either local municipalities, Spectrum, CenturyLink, Windstream, all the major providers that run fiber down highways. They're the ones leasing fiber. And then they're saying, okay, hey, we'll pay you this much money per month for X number of gigabits per second or megabits per second. And then from there, the WISPs actually go out and deliver and build out the infrastructure to the customers. And that has actually been a pretty interesting business. And I think it's kind of weird because they're competing directly against the company that is providing them the fiber. So like, for example,
It's almost like an MVNO where
it is very similar.
They're getting the service from, like, US Mobile gets the service from Verizon, and they're
Mm-hmm.
reselling it at better rates for consumers, but they're building a really great product targeted for that demographic of users who wants the more affordable plan and that
Yeah.
meets their needs.
But I
Yeah,
wouldn't even
and I
say
have a
they're
friend.
I was just gonna say I wouldn't even say they're competing, because a lot of times where these WISPs where they take off are places that Spectrum wasn't going to build out to anyways. All I was just going to say, it's typically not stepping on each other's toes.
Yeah, and they're not, right, and that's the whole reason why the WISPs are there, is that they've been left behind, and the WISPs actually come in and say, hey, we're going to take care of you. One of the things that really stinks about that, though, is that you compare this to MVNOs, right, Stetson, and you talk about how similar. It's similar to a point, but the costs and the amount of work that WISPs have to do to go and deploy this product is by and large way more than an MVNO does. Like, because
so what are
the
the
network's
WISPs
there.
doing?
Yeah, so they're working with governments to actually get like monopoles or existing structures. I know I've seen them reuse water towers, corn silos, barns, anything that's existing today that can be reused for a tower to actually either send or receive the internet feed coming, from the POP, the point of presence. They're going to use that. But that's really costly, though, right? They're having to go out directly to these rural places, driving in the middle of nowhere, talking to, whoever and say, hey, see you've got a barn here. Do you mind if you pay us $50 a month? We'll put an antenna on your barn and then we'll get you internet. It's a really interesting business model. And I have a friend of mine who is the CEO of a broadband company here in North Carolina. And he's servicing a lot of the eastern portion of North Carolina with broadband. And he sees, they're growing pretty quickly just because I'm sure other states have this problem too. But, out in the rural areas, they just kind of stopped. They drove the fiber as far as they wanted to, and then they turned their truck around and drove away. And they were like, all right, well.
And now it's just too expensive for them to build it out. Like, it doesn't make sense economically.
Which is funny because
they say that.
Because Pennsylvania Pennsylvania on our phones, we have a 911 recovery fee that the state charges. And that fund of money is supposed to cover stuff related to 911 calls and different stuff. But we actually took the money from that pot and paid Verizon, who's the tier 1 ISP in Pennsylvania, to actually deploy fiber across the whole state way back when in like 1990 or something. And they actually never left up to their promise. So we paid them, they pocketed the money, and they never
Shocker.
did. So honestly, the excuse of not having the money is ridiculous because we've already subsidized them on multiple occasions for them to expand, including with the FCC with recent funds for rural broadband development. So not falling for that. The issue is that it's simply not profitable to run. And this is truthful. It's simply not profitable to run, say, like a DOCSIS plant and extend it out to these rural homes that are literally miles apart or even fiber because the upfront cost is expenses, which we might cover, but then there's also the maintenance portion of things, right? And that's very expensive. Mm-hmm. But the idea of the WISP is something I actually like because it's actually something I thought about. I remember I watched a video on YouTube. They were talking about, like, Detroit, actually, a city, right? They have like these huge centers of like low income populations don't have access from any cable providers or nothing. And like the community was making these WISP networks. Well, I started looking into it because remember, I grew up in a small town with very poor internet access. And I had talked to Armstrong about getting like an enterprise grade, like Metro E level fiber line ran. It would have cost like $20,000 to build out. And I would have got like 200 by 200. But I was just thinking like, what if
seems worth it to me, Dennis? 20 grand?
And then it would have been $550 a month, but
that's even better deal.
But I was actually thinking about like how can I actually make this affordable to me, and so I looked at Ubiquity's WISP setups because the homes in my small town are actually relatively close, so it wouldn't have been that hard to do, and I could have kind of dispersed that cost and then simply gave myself, using QoS like 50 by 50 and been happy go lucky,
Yeah.
What I mean?
Yeah, I actually went down a similar path, Dennis, like 2 years ago, where I actually got priced out for DIA, which is a direct internet access product. They run BGP and all sorts of routing protocols with you, and you are the provider at that point. So Austin Net would become the ISP, and then I would sell service directly to other people. So one of the things that I saw was that there's just not a level of interest that people have to pay that type of money. It's going to, at the end of the day, they just want whatever the cheapest plan is. And not everyone does, but I think for a lot of people, when we talk about your average consumer, I think they just want something that is reasonable, that they can work into their budget, that, they can plan for. But DIA was going to be like $700 a month for a 100 meg connection. So I would have had to build out an entire network of speed test, servers, and I'd have to build out like a billing platform. And I was like, oh man, that seems like a lot of work.
It's too much, yeah.
And then you had the taxes and stuff. But Austin, so we touched briefly on satellite. We touched briefly on T-Mobile's internet. We side talked into wireless ISPs. I want to circle around now to cable because it sounds like to me, I know you're using Spectrum, but I don't know how you feel, like what your stance on is with cable. But I kind of want to talk about them. I want to talk about what they're doing in the short term right now with, for example, I think I read that Spectrum was actually reducing upload speeds in certain markets because of how the usage changed. Same thing with Cox. And then I want to talk about the future going forward for them. So
yes. Well, so where do you want to start with that, Dennis?
Let's just start with as far as cable internet's concerned. Tell me where you stand right now on it, right? Like, do you think it's a good product that still's got life in it, or do you think they're bleeding it like a dead horse?
So there's a lot to that. I do love how like affordable cable is. Okay, I love that you can get like a 200 meg internet connection for $50 a month. I mean, most people spend that on going out to lunch at the office or doing something as mundane. Now, the internet is a crucial piece of technology, and I think that we're going to see cable internet like probably till we're all in our old age, just because they can still continue to profit off of that. I mean, the cable is already there. You know, they're not having to run new cable, and with the introduction of DOCSIS 4.0, the cable that's actually ran under the ground is a cable type called RG6. So
In
if you go look
RJ59 in
at
older
the
areas.
yeah, RG59 is the older stuff that was done back in like the 80s and 90s, and then all the new stuff is RG6 that gets deployed. And I think RG6, from what I'm reading, is still going to be compliant with the DOCSIS 4.0 standards. So I don't think, again, we're going to see these amazing 10 gigabit speeds that the ISPs want to tout. And even if we do, we're probably not going to want to pay for them. You know, I mean, if we're getting millimeter wave from Verizon, which they say everyone's going to get, you know, in these big old areas, you know, that's part, and it's going to be unlimited as part of your plan. I just can't see a need for somebody to have the average person. Now, I'm just talking about, you know, 80% of America to have 10 gigabit internet at their house. I mean,
Well,
if a person like me, yeah, I mean, even like you guys, I mean, you guys are not, you know, ripping through gigabit internet. Now, Stetson, I know he's never had any cable in his life, but for the
well,
most part,
the bandwidth's not the problem with the wireless technologies for me. That's not the issue. Like going back to to talk about bandwidth real quick. Most things that we do, like you had mentioned before, don't require a lot of bandwidth. The exception being video streaming, and even that 25 megabits can suffice for a person easily handling any type of resolution, right? The
easily.
problem the problem is consistency, latency, and packet loss.
Yep.
And wireless is going to inherently be worse than any type of hardwired connection, whether it be copper or not, if it's properly maintained. And specifically with latency, like here in Pittsburgh, since I'm pretty close to like a lot of the Northeast servers, my ping time directly to the Comcast head end is around 9 to 11 milliseconds. There is some variance there, of course. And then my connection to the Northeast servers, due to Comcast peering paths that they have with how they have their own fiber, and I'm usually not going on the wider internet, I'm usually averaging around between 30 to 50 milliseconds depending on the game server. That is a hard number to beat from, say, even Verizon's millimeter wave technology, at least with what we're currently seeing right now, since they haven't really updated their core yet to take full advantage of it yet.
Yeah.
And I was just going to say, and by the very nature of 5G millimeter wave, so much can impact the performance. I mean, just this glass window right here could really impact the performance that I have, right? But your thoughts?
Yeah.
Tell me if I'm off the mark.
No, I think you're on the right track. I'm not sold on the idea that millimeter wave is going to be the way forward for home internet. I just don't. I think when you talk about having a reliable home internet connection, you would literally have to put an antenna on the top of your house. And I mean, we talk about, you know, technicians coming out to install cable. At most, they drill a small hole inside of your wall and run a cable box in there. That's it. But I mean, think about the cost that it's going to take to bring somebody out there that's not only qualified to do the work, but you want doing the work. Do you want a guy on your house, or, you know, a girl drilling through your roof, putting a millimeter wave antenna, you know, in the top of your roof? I don't. I mean, I would rather just have slower internet. I don't want to
And
hold
my
them.
HOA would probably not let that in my new house. They purposely have in the fine print in the HOA that you can't have
Right.
satellites. So
Yeah, I think it's going to be great for these city dwellers that live in downtowns. I mean, it's going to be easy to get to. You can put a little omnidirectional antenna in your window, and, you know, even if it's the connection's not a great one, you're still going to get a couple hundred megabits. You know, it doesn't really matter.
Totally usable.
Totally usable. But the thing is like, if you live in the city, there's a good chance you already have fiber anyway. So that's one of the things that I'm not really sure on where the upsell is. It's like you also give the people in the city millimeter wave, but they also have fiber. So what do you like, dual WAN, millimeter wave, and fiber? I don't get the strategy for the way that they're deploying that.
So let's also talk a little bit too. So it's for the average consumer, a lot of people don't realize this, but when we talk about cable, most cable providers today, I mean, there might be a very small like regional provider that's not this true, but most cable providers they actually do have fiber in their networks. Now there's variance on how far they deploy it into their network, but typically it's fiber to the node at this point, right? Like that's pretty much the norm.
Yeah,
Am I
I
off
mean,
the mark?
you're not off the mark at all. I mean, every single provider has fiber to some degree in their network. I mean, they have to be able to run connections from different geographical locations. Now, if they're a local ISP, like what Stetson's talking about here, they might not. But we're, the AT&T's, Spectrum, Verizon, CenturyLink, Windstream, all of the tier one ISP, even like tier two, like Frontier. Well, I guess they got bought by Verizon, not really applicable. But all the tier two, like tier three providers, they even have fiber in their networks. That's just the nature of how this works. Because to your point, Dennis, you run a peering protocol, typically like BGP or something. That's the internet routing protocol that ISPs use. So when you peer with another ISP, you are telling them, hey, these are the subnets that we own. And then in order to get to these subnets, you need to send traffic to this address. So that's how the internet works, right? It's just multiple people coming together with different IP space saying, hey, you want to get to my web server, you need to go this direction or go this direction. So it's all the same stuff. But in order for that to work, you have to have fiber, unless you're just doing a local hop off or something.
So my point in bringing it up, though, the fact that fiber is already ran today, my point in bringing it up is this. We see a lot of emphasis on these new dock standards, right? We're seeing technicians go out and doing upstream splits for certain markets and different downstream splits and adding OFDMA channels and stuff like that to the infrastructure to try to get more life out of this coaxial technology. My question to you is, though, how difficult would it be just to say cut my losses, right, and say for this last mile, I'll just do fiber to the home. I'll do the GPON standard, or I'll do similar to what Fios is doing with an ONT and just convert it into an RJ45 connection for the consumer.
It's kind of what you said earlier, right? It's all about the money. The way AT&T deploys their fiber network is great. They run literally fiber directly from the POP, directly inside your house. They drill a hole through your house and they terminate fiber into an ONT and they give you an Ethernet jack and say, have a nice day. And from there, they have the flexibility to upgrade to, Google Fiber recently announced that they were giving their customers that had gigabit service the 2 gig. So with AT&T, it's going to be the same deal, right? They have all the equipment in place and all the fiber laid in the ground to support that. I think it would be easier to cut your losses, Dennis, but like with all things, it's all about that money. And I think at the end of the day, the bottom line means more than actually providing the service, because
fiber's come down significantly in cost per mile to the point where it's pretty comparable to coax. The only reason I can think of not wanting to do it is the human labor cost, because fiber is so much more difficult to splice and deploy. But outside of that upfront cost and training the technicians, fiber, generally speaking, is actually easier to maintain. It's not subject to some of those weather conditions like coax. When it's outside and it's cold, it tends to shrink, which affects the signal levels on the different channels, which you would be more familiar with since you handle radio frequencies. And then when it's hot, it tends to expand. Or maybe I reversed that. I'm sorry.
Well, so the reason for that is because if you look around, and everywhere I go, I look for fiber. Look around next time you're out in the streets. You will probably not see aerial fiber. You will see it in some places, but when you talk to any technician from AT&T, Windstream, Verizon, even T-Mobile, Zayo, all the the ISPs, they're not running fiber aerial through power lines. They are absolutely always running it underground. And that's to your point, right? They learned with coax that it was quicker, it was cheaper, and it was easier. But long term, that has issues. They have to replace it. The jacket around the shielding of the RG6 actually gets destroyed. It contracts and expands, and there's other issues that go along with that, with the weather and the ability to be struck by lightning and things like that. And I know that it's all grounded, But in some cases, if like lightning comes down, it can actually strike that cable and pass into the earth.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Well, Austin, I do know you have to get going reasonably soon here. So is there anything else you wanted to touch on kind of in the last sort of section? I know we were thinking of talking about voice over LTE and voice over NR, but I almost feel like you might be better to have you back on to talk about that, because I feel like it's like a longer topic. But
Yeah, so there's a lot that goes into that, and I agree with you, Stetson. I think maybe we save that topic for another podcast, because I don't think I have enough time to get into
yeah,
I have
all
one
the things
short
we
question. One short
Oh
question
yeah,
before you go,
go for it,
Austin.
Dennis.
To put a nice bow on this, right? If you're a rural American and you're kind of like in this hard situation, what should you be choosing as your internet replacement? What should it be? Is it DSL? Is it cable? Is it Starlink? Is it T-Mobile? What is the one that you recommend to those people
Well,
that are in those hard to find places?
I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt, no matter what, it's not DSL. Okay, that is not the way. That is not the way, folks. Realistically, in today's market, Starlink's not available, so really that's out. I don't really think HughesNet is a viable option, nor is
with those
VSAT,
pitiful limits.
unless you absolutely are unless you live in a bunker in space. I mean, I can't imagine, in a place where in today's world where you're not getting some coverage, you have to be able to make a phone call. Realistically, if I've got $100 a month, I'm probably going with T-Mobile home internet. And I know I sat here and bashed it for 20 minutes about the lack of features and things like that, but honestly, for the money, $50 a month, uncapped, deprioritized speeds, if you get N71 out where you live, which most people do, unless, like I said, you live out in the middle of nowhere, I would go with that as my number one option. The other option I would have is probably, like, the second option, I would go with Viasat. They are a better option than HughesNet pricing wise, but they're definitely not going to be my best option. And then third, well, that's what I mean. If you have cable, that's definitely number one. But if we're talking rural, like deep rural,
Yeah.
then it wouldn't be an option. But if you have cable, it's still a viable option in 2021 and will continue to be a viable option for home internet, both in the metro areas and rural areas. I'd say probably for the next 5 to 6 years, maybe longer. I mean, honestly, I think the FCC is going to continue to pump money into the development and the progression of that, just because the amount of money that it would take to uproot all these existing networks and lay fiber across every square inch of the United States would be astronomical. I could not even imagine what that cost would be to go into every single neighborhood now, cut a hole in the ground, feed fiber through, and start from scratch.
I know you also had a great segment in the podcast about WISPs. Where do you feel like they would kind of play a role in this hierarchy that you're giving?
So WISPs are a really great option for people that are on the edge like this. It goes like this, right? Cable internet, T-Mobile home internet, and then Viasat. Those are kind of like my number three, like 1, 2, and 3.
Yep.
But if you're in a unique situation where you don't have cable, you don't have T-Mobile coverage in your area, and you don't have the money to spend on $100 a month satellite internet beamed from space, you are going to be the target demographic for getting the internet service provider through a local WISP. And they're coming, all these rural areas, like WISPs here, you guys. If you are struggling right now with internet and you don't have the money for $100 a month satellite internet, and you don't have any cell coverage, it's going to happen. The FCC has already been giving grant money to these local companies out there to go and say, hey, we've tried it with AT&T, we've tried it with Verizon. These guys just took our money and ran. We're going to do something else. So you're going to see a lot more of that over the next couple of years.
Yeah.
Well,
awesome.
Austin, I really want to thank you for coming on, man. And I loved talking to a fellow person like yourself that I could geek out with about my new home behind the scenes.
Oh,
which,
yeah.
if anybody wants to catch that, could be found on Patreon, by the way. But We'll definitely have to talk and have you on again because there's so much more to talk about with what you're doing with Salesforce with your company. I wanted to ask you about your donkey and different things.
Oh
Like,
yeah, we got
we got
definitely
stuff
next time.
we got to rehash on that. But for now, man, you get going, and thank you again. You're always welcome on the show. We'll definitely have to
Yeah,
reach out and schedule something again so we can talk about those things.
Yeah,
absolutely,
Austin.
absolutely.
Everything Dennis just said. Thank you so much for joining us. A pleasure talking with you, and I look forward to the next episode where we have you on. We can dive in further to some of these topics and even discuss some of the new ones like voice over LTE, voice over NR, 5G deployments, DSS, and more. So thank you so much. Take care, and hope you have a safe trip.
Great, thanks guys. I really appreciate it. Y'all have a
All
good
right.
day.
Bye.
Bye bye.
All
And
right.
for everyone
Stetson.
else, yeah, we're going to actually stay live for a little bit. Dennis and I, we're going to do a little news segment here, interact with the audience on the live chat on YouTube. So yeah, what's cooking? What's kind of going on in the news of things?
Well, before we get too deep into the news, I want to take a brief moment to thank some of our Super Chat supporters.
Yeah, so shout out to Mark. Thank you so much for the super chat, Mark. We really appreciate it, and we want to thank you for your continued support. There's no message here, so thank you to that. And, I just feel like going through some of the comments. First of all, correction, I'm actually paying $70 a month instead of $80 a month for my symmetrical fiber internet. And it looks like some people also had T-Mobile home internet in the live chat. So I want to say that they appear to be enjoying that as well.
I don't know. I was reading the one person. He told me it kicked him off and he was having a hard time streaming 480p. But, all right. Was that the only super chat? Okay. I just wanted to make sure we got that. I didn't want you to think we were ignoring it there. We were just so deep in that conversation. We just kind of had to wait there, Mark. Sorry about that. But,
We also have one commenter saying, Dennis, that the earnings call just ended for T-Mobile. So we're going to have to actually probably catch up on that after the stream and include that in our next episode next week, just so we can kind of touch on that. But yeah, I think that was a really great episode with Austin. And Dennis, anything in particular you want to touch on? Any news related stuff?
yeah.
Yeah.
We'll do that. So I want to talk about, I want to circle things back to our bread and butter, cell phone talk.
Yeah.
Did you see that Comcast in their quarterly earnings added 246,000 wireless subscribers to their Xfinity Mobile?
You told me about this yesterday, so I did hear that, and that's really huge. So what do you think that means for Comcast and kind of the mobile landscape?
I think that this means that cable operators can be considered serious cell phone providers because Comcast has grown past 2 million, I believe, as far as cell phone subscribers, which is pretty large, right? Isn't that bigger than a lot of those MVNOs out there? So I would say that Comcast is a force to be reckoned with in the cell phone space. And because Comcast and these different cable operators are not reselling, but using Verizon's network, I think they're kind of eating into Verizon's bottom line a little bit. They're taking away that postpaid revenue and bringing it over to something cheaper.
I think it's definitely a balance where if you're already providing someone a home internet solution and you're suddenly able to bundle in the service plan with that, I think it, as you mentioned, it can be really affordable for a lot of people. We've touched on Xfinity Mobile and how their 1 gig or 3 gig options with maybe 3 to 4 lines can be a really great option for families, where all of a sudden the cost per line ends up being closer to like 12 to 15 bucks a month, which is insane. And you're getting the postpaid priority that you normally get on Verizon. So I think what these companies are doing is great. Does it impact Verizon's bottom line? Maybe a little bit, but they are still bringing in revenue. And these customers may not necessarily all be coming from Verizon, right? They could be switching from AT&T or T-Mobile. And I think, it is a really good option for consumers to get more affordable plans that meet their needs and Verizon to still bring in additional revenue.
Well, if I remember correctly, didn't Stetson actually report losing about roughly around the same amount of people?
You mean
Q4?
Verizon?
Yeah, Verizon postpaid.
I can't remember, but you might be right because I know Verizon actually had a pretty bad quarter in terms of their performance of postpaid net adds.
Yeah.
So it was a net loss for them.
I'm pretty sure they reported about the same loss, and since the market's saturated, there's not too many
Yeah,
places those customers can come from. Like T-Mobile reported gains, so I doubt a lot of them came from there. AT&T, I also believe, did decently well.
They had such a strong. I mean, so I think the thing with carriers is they kind of allocate their resources in different ways, right? Where we saw AT&T had a really strong push with their iPhone 12 promotion. You could basically get a free iPhone 12, both existing and new customers with AT&T. So they were
Which
kind of
reduced
subsidizing
churn.
that. And yeah, to reduce churn, they had one of the best churn rates of all time, one of the best quarters, which was impressive. T-Mobile had really good offerings for new customers with their plan, and they gave out free lines to everyone. So of course you're going to see net ads, but what really is an ad? Is it an active service line or is it an actual customer? How are they measuring that? And then Verizon, they weren't really strongest in that area, but they did buy TracFone, and maybe Verizon postpaid lost subscribers, but I think there was just some internal shuffling in terms of people migrating from postpaid to prepaid, but they're still on the Verizon network. And now that Verizon owns TracFone, I'm assuming the ARPU or the revenue per user does go up for them on that. So
I was thinking the average ARPU would go down because you're not making nearly as much profit. Like your postpaid is your bread and butter, right? Postpaids are less
yeah,
likely to jump ship. You're making more revenue off them. Typically, postpaid accounts have multiple lines, so that's where you're getting your highest ARPU. When I think prepaid or when I think MVNO, I think one, maybe two line users, or if it is a big family, it's probably like a plan that's $100 or less.
yeah.
Right?
No, I specifically mean because they're not selling the service to TracFone, who is then providing the service. I'm specifically talking about for TracFone, though, like that customer base will increase in ARPU for Verizon.
Oh, sorry, I misunderstood. My
Yeah,
apologies.
no, you're 100% correct, though. I mean, the postpaid is the bread and butter. It's basically what's funding the 5G build out, what's allowing Verizon to bid, what was it, like $40 billion on the C-band auction, which is
something
insane.
nuts.
So,
Which, on a side note, speaking of the C-band auction, I believe Comcast and other cable providers did actually get their fingers in that spectrum auction.
yeah,
right?
we saw that. I think reports are out now kind of showing the estimates for the bidding prices. I don't think anything's been super confirmed as of yet, but yeah, they were in there. T-Mobile was in there. AT&T was in there. I think we even had Comcast, I want to say, like a bunch of providers.
Yeah.
Who's the new? I'm blanking on the name. It's Dish. I think Dish might have been in there too.
Yeah. So my question to you is, Stetson, do you think that we might actually see Comcast maybe become a big regional player in the cell phone space?
Yeah, I mean, they very well could do that. I would hope to see that, honestly, because I think competition is great. What I'm really most curious about is what Dish is going to do, because I want to see them build their network out, and I want to see it actually come to life and be good. And the second thing, how do you feel about that? Are you optimistic, pessimistic? What's your stance on Dish right now?
Dish doesn't have a great track record when using their spectrum. Like, they always bought it, sat on it, and didn't really do anything with it.
Now's their chance. Like, that's what I'm saying. This could be their opportunity.
I mean, I don't know, man. I mean, I want them to do big things because I'm excited because they're starting from ground zero, which means they can buy all the latest and greatest equipment, and they're not paying the premium that other networks might have when they try to deploy that technology.
Yeah, there's going to be less upgrading. Like, they're going to be able to deploy it right now, do it right, do it once, and it'll be good for potentially 5 to 10 years.
Like, that's the exciting part, and they can do something maybe that's a little bit different than what traditional networks have always done. So those are the exciting things to me, right? Yeah. And the fact that Dish has typically been known as like a cheaper alternative when it was in their TV space, so I'd imagine that would extend into their cell phone brand. However, the way that company's ran, man, I don't have that high of expectations. I'm thinking that Dish might end up being like Sprint, and if they're like Sprint, the only thing they're doing for me is hopefully getting them to reduce costs on the other providers, but I'll never consider them. I'm actually more interested to see what cable operators will do with that spectrum, because here's the scoop, right? I have mixed relations with Comcast. Like, I don't think they're a saint or anything like that, but their internet has done me right. Okay,
Yeah,
I haven't had that.
You were saying that the actual internet experience, the internet was great. It was actually quite good. The hardware was good.
Yeah, the internet and the hardware is quite fine. Like, I've never had a problem with that. That's never been where my beef was with the company. So like their actual services themselves, I've gotten great enjoyment out of.
I think it's for most people, it's like the customer service is where you raise a red flag.
And my pocketbook.
Oh yeah, because you were paying a lot. They charged premium. What was it?
104 for gig when I had it.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean that was still cheaper than the 300 that Armstrong was charging for 50 by 5 back in the day, but
Yeah.
still $104 is a lot of money for just internet.
And didn't you have to pay to get rid of the 1.2 terabyte cap too on your plan?
Yeah, 1.2 terabyte cap. It's $30 to remove that, which is like another expensive add-on, or $11 if you have their modem rental, I believe. But actually, I'm gonna hold that thought because there's something that actually just came out that's positive news in that aspect. But let me hold that thought. But circling back, I'm excited to see what cable operators will do because they have a lot of free cash flow. Like they're not in debt like the other, like AT&T and Verizon. Like they actually have a lot of cash flow, so they have the money to do things. And because they're already ISPs, they have the fiber already deployed. They literally run the fiber to like cell towers like T-Mobile's and stuff like that. So that infrastructure is already in place, and they already have all the permitting done for a lot of these communities. Like Comcast specifically has these Wi-Fi hotspots, like in like churches and venues and stuff. So it would be very easy to imagine that they add a ton of microcells to just really take advantage of this C-band spectrum they buy. And I can picture basically getting like Xfinity Mobile, and they would still obviously roam on Verizon for outside of their footprint. But when you're in their territory, I could imagine have a very densely packed network using like Comcast and getting some really great speeds. Maybe not on par with millimeter wave, but darn near close. Like, and because of how Comcast operates with their bundles, right? I could imagine it probably still being maybe a little bit cheaper than Verizon postpaid directly. So that's what I'm more interested in seeing. I want to see what they're gonna do.
I think that's actually a great point. I mean, so one of the pros and cons of Xfinity Mobile and kind of how they run their business is they're leasing network access from Verizon, right? And so that gives their customers priority data on the Verizon network. The other big thing they're doing is they have the Wi-Fi hotspots deployed, and they're giving their customers free access to those hotspots. And this helps provide typically, better connection in some markets. The Wi-Fi can potentially be a little bit more reliable, or it can provide indoor connection. But I've also seen some reports where because the firmware on the phone is set to prioritize the Wi-Fi hotspots, because Comcast doesn't have to pay for your access of those hotspots, right? They only have to pay Verizon for on-network usage. So if you're off-network, you're on an Xfinity hotspot, they're good to go. The problem is sometimes the phone can aggressively try and switch, and that can potentially cause dropped calls and or ironically less reliable connection. So
yeah, but that's something that could be fixed with software, right? Like
the same way I can.
Well, I mean, no, think about it. Like on the S20 Plus, right, with T-Mobile, right? I have an option of cellular preferred or Wi-Fi preferred, right?
Yep.
And that same setting exists in pretty much every Android phone. That one little setting right there, cellular preferred, fixes your problem with aggressively preferring the Wi-Fi calling, right?
Absolutely.
Anywho, they're the ones I'm excited about because they got the most money on hand. And since money equals power, basically, they have the most authority to actually be somewhat viable. Like Dish is pretty broke in comparison to the type of money that they're raking in, right? I mean, so that's what I'm excited about. And before I move on to one other thing, I'll just say, Brian, Comcast is Xfinity, or known as Xfinity, and they're available in like 38 states. But Stetson, you touched on the data cap. I actually wanted to mention some good news, actually, for once.
Tell me, Dennis.
So Comcast they're still going to be putting the data cap out in the Northeast, which sucks. But they extended when they're going to start actually executing on that until like mid-year, like June, July.
Okay.
So like some like state attorney general in like I think Massachusetts or Maryland or something was really getting on their case. And
good for him or them.
Actually, Pennsylvania lawmakers were actually being useful for once,
nice.
which was nice. It'd be really great if it doesn't come at all because it personally hurts me. But at the end of the day, at least I'll be in my new house before that even happens.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, this is actually the best for you because you're gonna bypass the data cap and then jump right into your new home with Verizon Fios and be all set to go. I think actually. This is kind of jumping around a little bit, but hopefully we can parallel Comcast and Xfinity Mobile with Dish, because Comcast is kind of notoriously known for poor customer service, poor experience, but Xfinity Mobile is actually one of the highest ranked customer service MVNOs. I don't know if it's necessarily a true MVNO, but one of the cell phone providers is highly ranked because Comcast realized they were known for such poor customer service. They re-emphasized that in their mobile division. I'm hopeful. I don't know if optimistic is the right word, but I'm hopeful or hoping for the fact that Dish will have a similar approach. They acquired Ting, who is known in the industry for providing some of the best customer service available. And we've actually seen posts on Reddit where when the acquisition was taking place and Ting customers were rightfully expressing their concern over this transition, their migration, Ting employees were providing insight that they had built custom toolkits and tool sets to help answer customer support questions and queries. And so I'm really hoping that this acquisition for Dish means they can refocus on customer service and quality for their mobile division, and hopefully, turn it around, along with building a network, which they have yet to do. And I'd love to see that happen.
Which is funny because Dish has actually been known for having good customer service, I believe, like in the cable space.
So maybe just like less service, but good customer service.
Yeah. So I'd be curious to see if we end up seeing like a Jekyll and Hyde, like good TV service, bad cell phone service from Dish and reciprocal from Comcast, right? But
yeah.
Hopefully that doesn't happen. Hopefully both get better. All right, off of Comcast talk, you linked a news article asking what's behind America's Starlink obsession. You want to get into that with me a little bit? Because I totally missed the mark on that one.
Oh, yeah. So this was actually relating back to our conversation with Austin earlier in the show. And what I wanted to touch on with Starlink specifically is, we talked about their low Earth orbit satellites should provide hopefully good latency and decent speeds. But the current network structure actually has a theoretical maximum capacity of 485,000 data streams. And let's say if you have 100% oversubscription, you get around 50 million total subscribers. And that's not just in the US, this is globally. And so I think the concern potentially with Starlink is that even though it's reaching these rural areas, the network capacity may actually, depending, there's a lot of ifs and buts here, but the network capacity may actually almost not be enough to some degree. So I just wanted to bring that up as why there's still competition in this market, why going with something like T-Mobile home internet may be good, and what to consider. So yeah, that was kind of the point with that.
I mean, I'll just say for me, and I kind of said this earlier, but for me, Starlink is only going to be good for really rural markets because let's be real here. If you're living in rural U.S., you probably don't have good T-Mobile coverage. I hate to break it to the T-Mobile fans out there. I love T-Mobile, but they're definitely not known for having a dense packed network, especially out in rural America, right?
Yeah.
And if you do have rural coverage from T-Mobile, it's probably a 5x5 channel of band 71 or band 12, which not known for its speed.
Yeah, that's the 600 megahertz, right?
Yeah, 600 or 700 megahertz band that you'll probably have. So Starlink is going to be a godsend for those people. The other area that I don't see talked about often, but I see Starlink being good for, is travelers, like RVers, right? Like imagine, let's skip 5 years into the future, right? Elon Musk gets all his towers up. He has all of his little cells covered, right, for the U.S. All right, Starlink's in full on mode where you're not now blocked by this like region, and you can travel anywhere with it. Imagine just slapping one of those puppies right on top of your RV, getting a little electrical power outlet going, and just driving down Highway 89 or whatever route you're going to, cross trip, and having like usable internet the whole way through, like 100 megabits plus, and you go to your little campground out in like Yosemite or wherever you were going, and you're still just kicking, man. Like that to me would be the most fun aspect of Starlink.
I think yeah, you're absolutely right. I think that's one of the best use cases because RVers, they actually typically have to rely on the cellular connections, or I think if you have satellite, you actually have to transport an enormous satellite and like set it up anytime you camp or stop or whatever. So the cellular connection with the smaller modems that you can use, that's often better, but the plans definitely get, in my opinion, a little bit more sketchy because, some of the ones I mentioned earlier in the show, they can be A, expensive, and B, sometimes they actually discontinue some of the previous offerings because, Verizon's shutting those down. My thinking is, why isn't Verizon offering this themselves directly if there's clearly a market? So something about, I think, like network strain and adding too many high bandwidth users onto the network could impact congestion levels. And we do know, as Snead says, that Verizon's network is congested. Skinny channels are skinny channels, and they're not going to, magically get bigger and provide the bandwidth that people need. So I don't know.
Whoa. Snead didn't say that about Verizon. He said that about T-Mobile.
Oh, T-Mobile?
Yeah.
Excuse me. That's my
you
mistake
misquoted
there.
Snead. Yeah, no, he says Verizon has a densely packed network in his market.
Okay.
He's pro Verizon.
Well, the congestion is definitely real, though, because Verizon's LTE network has a lot of users. A lot of people signed up for it, and it doesn't quite have enough spectrum, I think, to really deliver on that. So I think home internet use for Verizon could be more of a problem, whereas T-Mobile seems to have more cells built out to more adequately meet the needs of consumers.
Gotcha. So Stetson, just as a quick fun question, I mean, we'll talk on some Patreon questions after this, but just as a fun question for you, right? I'm sure you probably feel like you just got out of a college class, right? You just learned about some of the really nerdy stuff with some of these different technologies, from satellite to cellular to whatever, right? Now that you've got all this info, right? Which option would you personally pick if you were in a tough situation? So there's no fiber available to you, right? But I'll give you your choices. You have cable, like what I have, okay? You got T-Mobile's home internet, and I'll say you actually live in a good area where you get N41.
Okay.
You got Starlink available to you, and of course Viasat and HughesNet.
Yeah, so
what are you picking?
I think I'm actually leaning a little bit more towards T-Mobile home internet in that scenario, because if I have N41 available, I feel like that's pretty good speeds, typically over 300 megabits per second, and the cost of T-Mobile home internet is just so good. And like Starlink is twice of that, right? So it's $100 a month. Plus I have to pay $500 for the actual satellite dish or whatever that I have to set up. So based on those, it may depend what the not the fiber, but the cable option is and what those speeds are. But
cable, I think you can expect. I'll say you can get all the way up to a gig, but it's asymmetrical, so it's 1,000 down, 40 up is your max.
Okay.
Upload.
So yeah, it would either be cable or T-Mobile, and it would just come down to like pricing and what my personal needs were for speed, in that environment.
Well, let me make it more precise then, since we narrowed it down.
Yeah.
We'll say that cable's gigabit internet, $90. T-Mobile, and that's for 1,000 megabits per second down, 40 megabits per second upload. That's pretty spot on, consistent, right?
Yeah.
And then there's T-Mobile, which remember, you're deprioritized. You're not always getting those best speeds. But we'll say T-Mobile, $50, and we'll say that you're averaging 150 megabits per second down and 25 up. That's your average.
That's definitely, that definitely makes it a more challenging scenario. I think I would probably try T-Mobile first. And the reason I'm still sticking with them is it's what would that end up being? 90 versus 50, 40, 400, $480 per year, right? Like that's a pretty significant chunk of change for, I'm getting faster speeds I may or may not even be using, as we talked about earlier in the show, that, most people, doing a 4K stream, 25 megabits per second, you're fine. So if I'm getting, 100 to 150 on T-Mobile, I think that's great. So that's what I would do. Dennis, turning this right on you, what would your pick be in this situation?
Comcast or cable.
You'd go cable. You want that.
Yeah. The only reason is because that firmware, man. I game.
Oh, that's a really good point.
I have to be able to do port forwarding. I have to. And I have devices on my network where I like to set up static routing for my LAN network. I have to be able to do that. And I don't care if it was literally $5 a month. If that feature isn't there, then it's useless to me. So it doesn't matter if it was faster speeds. Like, I need that functionality.
Absolutely.
Okay, now you're just making me jealous. I get 1 gig for $50 with Frontier here in Texas. All right, I'm jealous.
Yes, this is a live comment from someone joining us on the live stream of the podcast. Latrue Noir getting 1 gigabit for 50 with Frontier here in Texas. So that's amazing. That's actually a better deal than what I'm getting, because we're paying $70 is the corrected price.
Hey, I'm jealous of both of you. Okay?
Yeah, hey,
I'm paying
soon,
60
Dennis.
for 300 by 10. Okay.
Soon, Dennis. Very soon. Either way, maybe we should consider kind of wrapping this up here.
Yeah.
It was a great show.
Patreon
really fun.
Questions, though.
I submitted. Maybe it was too late. I didn't see any questions on the Patreon post, so I'll turn it over to anyone listening live on YouTube. If you have a question, feel free to type it in the chat. Dennis and I will try our best to answer, and I'll check Patreon to see if anything has popped up from our supporters there. But yeah, We have Bryant suggesting that we all move to Texas, and it seems like a good place to me. And again, I'm just checking on Patreon. Want to give a shout out to the Patreon supporters. If you're not already a Patreon supporter, please do consider supporting us. You get behind the scenes content. We actually uploaded a sneak peek of the conversation with Austin as a bonus live stream exclusively for Patreon supporters last night. So that was really fun to do.
We
either
were
way,
doing an audio test, and there were some cool topics that we didn't talk about. So you definitely should subscribe to get a look at that. But it doesn't look like we got any questions, so I'll be quiet and let you call the show then.
Let's call it a day. So yeah, thank you everyone for joining us for this episode of the Best Phone Plans Podcast. Again, consider supporting us on Patreon, patreon.com/Stetson Doggett, to support the show, to get yourself extra behind the scenes content. We really appreciate it, and we thank you for your support. You will also get ad-free versions of the podcast episode, so don't wait. Check it out. Either way, that's going to be it for this episode. We're super excited to have Austin on in the future, but I'm Stetson.
And I'm Dennis.
And we look forward to talking to you in the next one.